What happens when a U.S. Senator goes head-to-head with the Secretary of Defense over billions in military funding, the future of NATO, and whether America should keep arming Ukraine? In a tense hearing, Coons didn't just question policy. He challenged the very idea of stepping back from global leadership. From accusations of Allied freeloading to a $3 billion weapons stockpile sitting unused while Russian missiles pound Ukrainian cities, this clash exposed deep divisions in Washington over war, peace, and America's place in the world. It began with a deceptively simple question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, just a quick question to clarify something. Is a full year continuing resolution bad for the Department of Defense? Just yes or no?
Sir, a full year continuing resolution is never preferable for any department, especially the Department of Defense. Not preferable.
And I know, General Kane, I don't need to ask you because your written testimony specifically says routinely operating under continuing resolutions lowers buying power, results in less deployable capital, makes it harder for industry to make long-term investments. And is it your commitment, Mr. Secretary, that you'll work with us to achieve a full year appropriation? You'll submit the budget documents necessary, work with us closely, that we'll be able to do our work so you can do yours.
Senator, we are committed to working with you to make sure the Defense Department gets as robust a budget as possible where we can meet the threats of today and tomorrow.
Thank you. I'll just say at the outset for all my colleagues, I am increasingly concerned that there is a threat that some believe they can best govern by continuing resolution, reconciliation, and rescission, and not ever actually have us appropriate. So I look forward to working with you to avoid that outcome, which I think would both disregard the role of Congress and put all of us at greater risk. It seems to me clear with regards to Ukraine that Vladimir Putin has no serious intent of negotiating. He continues to attack civilian targets night after night with hundreds and hundreds of drones. The Ukrainians have just carried out a spectacular attack against military targets. And it seems to me concerning that the 2026 request eliminates aid to Ukraine entirely. At the same time, the Senate has a strongly bipartisan bill led by Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal to impose more sanctions on Russia, and many senators of both parties want to provide more aid to Ukraine. Would you agree, Mr. Secretary, that the United States should use every tool it has at its disposal, including additional sanctions, to pressure Russia to come to the table to negotiate a just and lasting peace for the war in Ukraine?
Senator, every tool at our disposal? No. We have a lot of tools in a lot of places.
Let me be more narrow. Let me be more narrow then.
Apply.
You said, and I'll take some exception to this, that our European allies cannot freeload off the United States in perpetuity. My impression is that Article 5 of the NATO treaty was only invoked once. It was after 9/11. And a significant number of our European allies and partners deployed to Afghanistan alongside us and suffered significant combat casualties. In the first 2 years of the war in Ukraine, a war of Russian aggression, 50 other countries stepped forward, deployed military support, delivered materiel, provided financial and operating support, and at regular meetings of the Defense Contact Group, your predecessor led that process of deploying military assistance. What message do you think it sends? That as Ukraine continues to suffer day after day of punishing attacks on civilian centers, we're not using the $3.8 billion in presidential drawdown authority that remains to send additional air defense and interceptors, and you yourself chose to not attend the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. Mr. Secretary, why not use the already appropriated presidential drawdown authority to deliver defense material badly needed by Ukraine?
Well, Senator, as you know, the presidential drawdown authorities 71 through 74 still apply, and they are still flowing. There's some in reserve. To your question about my statement, and I served with a lot of NATO allies in Afghanistan as well. Incredibly capable Canadians, Brits, and Australians, and others. And grateful for them. And I've gotten to know a lot of them in this process going to Brussels. Amazing people, amazing countries.
Thus, I was struck, Mr. Secretary.
But we also wore a patch on our shoulder that said ISAF, International Security Assistance Force. And you know what the joke was? That it stood for I Saw Americans Fighting. Because what ultimately was a lot of flags, was not a lot of on-the-ground capability. You're not a real coalition, you're not a real alliance unless you have real defense capability and real armies that can bring those to bear. And that's a reality that Europe is waking up to quickly, and we're glad, because they're our friends, and we want them to be safe and free and secure. And sometimes that takes true talk and tough love, and they've responded very well to that because we want them to succeed. And
Mr. Secretary, let's just make clear for the record that our military partners in Afghanistan included many who served and died. Our Danish partners and allies on a per capita basis
don't try to make it look like I don't care about the investments of our partners. Of course I do.
Mr.
I recognize
Secretary,
that there were lives lost from other countries.
Of
but
course
the bulk of the effort was Americans, and an alliance needs to include other countries and be more balanced.
Mr. Secretary,
to be a real alliance.
as I pointed out in my opening comments, our partners and allies have stepped up, have invested, have engaged in the defense of Ukraine, and so should we. We should not be pursuing a ceasefire and a negotiated resolution to the war in Ukraine at any cost. Peace through strength means actually using our strength, continuing to support Ukraine, and securing a lasting peace. Putin will only stop when we stop him. And the best way to stop him is indeed through a stronger NATO. I look forward to the NATO summit. I agree with you that a significant investment by NATO in our collective security is a great investment, but we cannot abandon Ukraine. That would put us significantly at a strategic disadvantage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Coons asked the Secretary if a full-year continuing resolution, a stopgap funding measure, was bad for the Department of Defense. The answer was a quick yes, but the exchange opened the door to a bigger concern. Defense leaders have long warned that operating under temporary budgets erodes buying power, reduces deployable forces, and discourages industry from making long-term investments. Coons pushed for a full-year appropriation, pressing for the budget documents and cooperation needed to get it done. In his view, half measures won't cut it against a resurgent Russia and an authoritarian bloc watching for any sign of weakness. This wasn't just about spreadsheets and numbers. It was about sending a clear message to allies and adversaries alike that the United States intends to remain the backbone of NATO security. But the budget fight quickly shifted to a more urgent flashpoint: Ukraine. Coons noted with concern that the 2026 budget request eliminated aid to Ukraine entirely. At the same time, Putin's forces continue to launch drone and missile strikes on civilian areas night after night. Ukrainian forces had just pulled off a major attack on Russian military targets, yet the proposed budget suggested cutting them off. Coons reminded the room that a bipartisan bill, led by Senators Graham and Blumenthal, was moving to impose more sanctions on Russia and increase aid. So he asked directly, should the United States use every tool at its disposal, including additional sanctions, to pressure Russia toward a just and lasting peace? The Secretary's answer was blunt: no. That refusal set the tone for one of the most charged exchanges of the day. Coons countered that without sanctions, military aid and economic pressure, America loses all leverage. Without sustained support, Ukraine's bargaining position collapses, and Moscow has no reason to compromise. In his view, believing peace can be achieved by unilaterally pulling back is a dangerous fantasy. Every sanction, every shipment of weapons, and every act of solidarity builds the pressure needed to force a real enforceable peace, not a surrender disguised as diplomacy. The tension escalated when the discussion turned to America's allies. The Secretary had previously suggested that Europe couldn't depend on the U.S. forever, hinting at a pattern of freeloading. Coons dismantled that narrative by pointing out NATO's Article 5, the Mutual Defense Pledge, was invoked only once, after 9/11s. European allies didn't just stand by, they deployed to Afghanistan alongside U.S. forces, suffering real combat casualties. And in the first 2 years of the war in Ukraine, over 50 countries had stepped forward with military, financial, and operational support. This wasn't a one-way street. From there, Coons zeroed in on what he saw as a glaring failure: the $3.8 billion in unused presidential drawdown authority that could be sending air defense systems and interceptors to Ukraine. With Russian missile strikes pounding civilian targets, he pressed the Secretary on why that funding was sitting idle. The inaction, Coons argued, wasn't bureaucratic caution. It was a moral and strategic failure that left civilians exposed, emboldened Moscow, and chipped away at the credibility of America's security commitments. The secretary pushed back, praising NATO allies he'd served alongside in Afghanistan and acknowledging their sacrifices. But he also delivered a harsh reality check. A real coalition isn't just flags and statements, it's armies with modern defense capabilities ready to act. Many European countries, he said, had lacked that capacity for too long. Coons didn't deny the need for stronger allied militaries, but he warned that symbolic gestures alone won't stop tanks or missiles. Alliances, he argued, are built on shared sacrifice and trust, not just raw capability. In an era of rising authoritarian threats, photo ops aren't enough. Allies must be willing to put real skin in the game, but America must also honor its commitments. The exchange grew more personal when the secretary seemed to downplay Allied losses, prompting Coons to remind him that many nations, including Denmark, suffered combat deaths in Afghanistan. Yes, the U.S. bore the bulk of the burden, but those sacrifices mattered. And in Ukraine, partners have stepped up again, investing, engaging, and fighting for the defense of democracy. In Coons' view, this was exactly the wrong time for America to scale back. For Coons, the stakes are clear. Pursuing a rushed ceasefire now isn't peace, it's a pause that rewards Putin's aggression and sets the stage for the next war. Peace through strength, he insisted, means actually using that strength, continuing to arm Ukraine, reinforcing NATO unity, and securing a lasting peace that deters future aggression. Abandoning Ukraine now would not only betray those who have stood with the U.S., it would shred the credibility of America's security guarantees worldwide. He closed by looking ahead to the NATO summit, calling for significant investment in collective security. A stronger NATO, backed by real capabilities and firm commitments, is the best way to stop Putin and prevent future wars. In this vision, America doesn't retreat from the world stage, it leads with allies at its side, ready to match words with action. So where does that leave us? On one side, a warning that without stronger allies, coalitions are hollow. On the other, a conviction that abandoning Ukraine now would be a strategic disaster. Between them, the question of how America should wield its power, and whether the world can trust it to keep its word. This hearing wasn't just another DC policy debate, it was a test of vision, resolve, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about war, peace, and leadership. What do you think? Is Coons defending America's strength, or is he risking deeper entanglement in foreign conflicts? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to see the next explosive confrontation, one even more controversial than this, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it.